The International Organization for Migration says that thousands have been displaced in Ma'rib since last September. The United Nations calls warring parties to de-escalate, and Hans Grunberg is in Riyadh to recent developments. The Giants brigades continue to advance in Ma'rib amid Houthi total collapse. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazad Abdelbey. Starting from Ma'rib, the International Organization for Migration indicated that at least 60,198 individuals were displaced since September 2021 to Ma'rib city. In its latest report, the migration agency stated that families in more than 130 sites in Ma'rib live in torn or damaged tents. For its part, the United Nations Children's Fund said more than 8,500 newly displaced people, including estimated 5,200 children, arrived at Sumayya displacement camp in early November. Turning to Taiz, the humanitarian cell of the National Resistance started distributing food aid to the displaced from the recently liberated villages. The relief aid included 100 food baskets for the displaced, and this comes within the framework of the humanitarian and relief aid provided by the National Resistance to the displaced by the terrorist Houthi militia. The war caused by Houthi militia has deepened the suffering of displaced people, especially those who have returned their homes in the new liberated areas in the west coast. Ibrahim's family is one among 1,000 families who are lacking the basics of life, with almost a total absence of non-government organizations. This report has more details.
Ibrahim Abdullah Ali is 33 years old, married and has 5 children. He lives with both of his parents, a displaced family from Al-Katha area. Ibrahim was displaced for 2 years in the city of Najd Qasim. He owes 2 million riyals to a hospital in Taiz. The reason behind this debt is his eldest son Zakaria, who was injured by a bullet that penetrated his left cheek, along with bleeding and fractures.
My child got injured by a bullet. I was here and I couldn't find anyone to help, so I carried him and ran to Taiz. I paid 2 million riyals for his treatment. The hospital refused to accept the case at first. They could tell we can't afford it. But after getting help from other people in the village, we were able to get him into surgery. The surgery was successful. But after 4 days, we were all shocked by his death. Now, we need to pay 2 million riyals to the hospital, but we don't have any money left. We sold everything we have.
When the incident occurred, all hospitals refused to receive the case because they could see that this family couldn't afford the treatment and come from a poor family, and the operation cost 4 million riyals. At that time, the people of the village intervened and left their motorcycles as a pledge in order to save Zakaria's life. But unfortunately, it was too late. He died and they couldn't save him. Currently, Ibrahim's mother is unable to pay 2 million, which is a large amount, to the hospital where her grandchild died.
This family is suffering from very hard conditions and they have a debt to pay. Their child was killed by a bullet. They are in real need for help. They don't have household items, no blanket, no food supplies or water. Their house is not suitable for a proper living. They are really suffering a lot. They can't provide for their children or themselves. The children are not going to school. They can't afford for their education. I ask people who can provide any kind of humanitarian assistance to this family to help them live a proper life and survive.
Ibrahim lives in a small room threatened to fall at any moment, without mattresses or anything, only 2 blankets. He provides warmth for his children with a jacket when he returns home. He eats dry bread with his children and suffers from hunger and thirst. His family needs food and shelter. The children need clothes to protect them from the harsh cold. Ibrahim is threatened to imprisonment if he doesn't pay the debt, and so far he couldn't get help from any organizations or institutions.
Turning to recent developments, Antonio Guterres called for de-escalation. In a press statement by the UN spokesperson, the UN chief urged parties to engage in political talks with the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg.
The Secretary General calls upon all parties to exercise maximum restraint and prevent any escalation amidst heightened tensions in the region. There are no military solutions to the conflict in Yemen. The Secretary General urges the parties to encourage constructively and without preconditions with his Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and his mediation efforts with the aim to advance the political process to reach a comprehensive, negotiated settlement and to end the conflict in Yemen.
For its part, the United Nations Human Rights Council expressed its deep concerns by the continuing escalation of the conflict in Yemen. In a press release, the Human Rights Council called on parties to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian objects. The Council repeat calls by the Secretary General to all parties to exercise maximum limit and avoid escalation, stressing that there is no military solution to the conflict. The United Nations envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, arrived at the Saudi capital, Riyadh, to discuss current military escalation with senior Saudi and Yemeni officials. The Swedish diplomat met with Naif al-Hajraf, head of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Al-Hajraf affirmed the Council's support for the efforts of the UN envoy to resolve the Yemeni crisis, calling on the international community to use more pressure on the Houthis to engage seriously in the peace. Earlier, Grunberg met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed bin Mubarak and affirmed to continue his efforts to end the war and achieve peace in Yemen, noting that a political solution based on dialogue under the umbrella of the United Nations is the way to achieve a comprehensive peace that all Yemenis aspire to.
Currently, the Special Envoy is in Riyadh. He's traveling there today, where he's meeting with the senior Saudi officials, senior Yemeni officials to discuss the situation, obviously the recent military uptick that we've seen, not just today, but in the last few weeks. This is part of his efforts to intensify the talks on how to de-escalate the conflict.
The European Commission's Director General for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations said that Yemen is one of the most heavily mine-affected countries in the world. The European organization said between 13 and 15 January, 6 civilians, including children, were killed and 18 citizens were injured in 4 separate mine and unexploded ordnance incidents in Taiz, Shabwa, Al-Jawf, and Hudaydah. It stressed on the need for mine awareness education. Turning to Ma'rib, giant forces shot down a Houthi drone in Harib district. Military sources indicated that air defenses spotted a Houthi attack drone over Harib and shot it down. Earlier, the giant forces found hundreds of mines and explosive devices placed by Houthis inside United Nations relief kits in Harib. A military source reported that Houthi militia used United Nations relief boxes and placed mines inside them to transport them to the fighting fronts in Harib. in Ma'rib, government forces took control of the eastern Balak Mountains peak. A military official confirmed that the government forces and Giants brigades had taken control of the mountain peak after cutting all Houthi militia supply lines. The Ministry of Defense website quoted saying that Houthis are under the fire of the forces after all supply lines were cut off. The Giants brigades are still advancing and inflicting heavy losses on Houthi militia in different fronts. After liberating Shabwa, they have moved to Ma'rib and Al-Bayda. This report has more details.
On the outskirts of Ma'rib and Al-Bayda, the Giants brigades continue securing more gains with fierce battles taking place, during which the Giants liberated a large number of areas in Harib district. This coincided with the military progress of the government forces backed by tribes on the southern fronts towards Harib and Al-Juba.
Now, the militia is besieging Harib and Juba from the south by Giant brigades. The forces of Giants came from the western coast and made important achievements and supported us. And now we are besieging Houthi militia from the east and they cannot escape. Houthi losses are great on the fronts.
Houthi leaders escaped and suffered heavy losses in terms of lives and equipment. According to military sources, thousands of Houthi militants died during the clashes in the different frontiers.
Giant forces advanced towards Harib from Ain, and the road linking Harib and Aqabat Mal'a is almost under control of the Giants brigades. Now, we are closer to Aqabat Mal'a. Houthis are besieged and only prisoners or dead will come out of them. Their human and equipment losses are heavy.
Houthi rebels' latest progress with controlling areas without fighting turned into massive losses with the Giants and government forces' progress, as they recaptured several sites and incurred heavy losses in terms of equipment and lives to the militants. This comes at a time when Houthis' control of Harib closes to an end, amid the progress of the Giants in conjunction with the government forces and tribes' military siege posed on Houthis on the southern fronts.
To the west coast, the joint forces shelled Houthi rebels in Taz and Hodeidah, causing heavy losses in terms of lives and equipment. The military media of the joint forces reported that the artillery targeted Houthi military barracks in Maqbana. In Haiz, the joint forces targeted Houthis' fortifications in Jabal Ras and Al-Jarahi, inflicting heavy losses among them. Earlier, local and medical sources reported that Houthi militia had targeted civilian areas in Haiz district, injuring 2 civilians. Sources said that a rescue team from the joint forces moved the injured to the field hospital in Al-Khulkha. Yemen is still one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. More than half of Yemen's population is unable to access food for survival, and the rate of hunger is increasing every day. This report has more details.
An entire generation of people needed to rebuild Yemen after years of civil war are at risk from famine, aid agencies fear. 8 years of fighting have created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with 21 million people in need of help to survive. According to the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, 2.3 million children are acutely malnourished and nearly 400,000 children under 5 suffering from severe acute malnutrition and are at imminent risk. Annabelle Simonton of the UN's World Food Programme in Yemen said, "You speak to mothers who barely eat, so they can try to scrape together enough to feed their children, yet their children are still suffering from malnutrition. World Food Programme treats them, they get better, then they slide back into malnutrition again."
It's very difficult to declare, so a famine requires evidence of severe food insecurity, certain rates of malnutrition, as well as mortality rates. And in a conflict zone like Yemen, it's actually very difficult to get that kind of level of evidence. But we shouldn't be waiting for that. The fact is that right now, people are dying of hunger in Yemen, and so the time to act is now, and we certainly cannot wait for a second.
Yemen is at risk of losing an entire generation to malnutrition, and that's the generation Yemen needs to rebuild when peace finally comes. The World Food Programme feeds 30 million people in Yemen, but is cutting back rations for 8 million due to a lack of funding from donor countries. Simonton said, "We are reducing food for the hungry in order to feed the hungriest. It's really heartbreaking." According to UN estimates, 377,000 people died as a result of the war in Yemen last year. Hugh Owen from Disasters Emergency Committee Scotland said, "More than 20 million people are in need in Yemen. The pandemic is continuing to threaten lives with less than 1% of the population fully vaccinated." After years of war and destruction, downtrodden Yemenis do hope that a miracle happens and this bloody conflict ends.
Coming next. After Houthi militia attack on Abu Dhabi airport, where is the war in Yemen heading to?
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل بكيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما أخرج لما ندفنش القيلة ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما إحنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. Houthi rebels' recent attacks on Abu Dhabi received wide international and regional condemnation. The United Nations, EU, and the US condemned the attack, which caused numerous civilian casualties and were claimed by the Houthis. Likewise, France called on the Houthi militia to stop their destabilizing actions in Yemen and the region.
And I can tell you that the Secretary General condemns today's attacks on Abu Dhabi's international airport and the nearby industrial area, which reportedly caused several civilian casualties and have been claimed by the Houthis. Attacks on civilian infrastructure and civilians are prohibited by international humanitarian law.
For his part, the United States Social Security Advisor Jake Sullivan condemned Houthis' attack on Abu Dhabi. He stressed that the United States will work with the United Arab Emirates and international partners to hold Houthis accountable for their crimes. A suspected drone attack on Monday in Abu Dhabi caused multiple explosions, in which 3 people were killed, and Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for the attack. In response, the coalition launched airstrikes on Sana'a, leaving civilian casualties. This report has more details.
The attack by Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi group on civilian targets in the United Arab Emirates yesterday is likely to have repercussions in the war in Yemen and increased up regional tensions with Iran, analysts said. Abu Dhabi police said 3 people were killed and 6 wounded Monday when 3 fuel tanker trucks exploded in the industrial Masfa area near storage facilities of oil firm ADNOC. Abu Dhabi's reaction to the attack was firm. The UAE condemns this terrorist attack by Houthi militia on areas and civilian facilities on Emirati soil. It will not go unpunished. Houthi rebels acknowledge responsibility for the attack. In response, the Arab Coalition Alliance carried out airstrikes on what they called Houthi military targets in the capital Sana'a last night, following the strike on the UAE. Yet, reports confirm that those strikes left civilian casualties. Political analysts considered the Houthi attack on Emirati facilities in Abu Dhabi a major military escalation and an indication of the Houthis' concern about the UAE's effective role in the Yemen war. Yemeni experts said that they expected the military confrontations in Ma'rib to intensify in the coming days, with indications of the collapse of the Sweden agreement signed between the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels in Hodeidah. The Houthi militia attack came after a heightened political and media rhetoric against the UAE after recent battles, which resulted in the liberation of 3 districts in Shabwa, in addition to Harib district in Ma'rib, in which the forces of the Giants Brigades made significant progress. International diplomatic pressures recently intensified on the Houthi rebels in parallel with military movement on the ground, where the Iran-backed Houthis lost large swathes of territory in Shabwa and Ma'rib, while the Arab coalition intensified air raids based on an updated target bank.
Moving to health, the World Health Organization said it has supported, in collaboration with King Salman Relief Center, COVID-19 isolation units across Yemen. WHO and King Salman Relief Center has provided cutting-edge medical devices and targeted drugs to alleviate suffering and help COVID-19 patients recover. The partnership has provided training and rehabilitation programs for health staff that have helped them expand their skill in dealing with infections. To that end, the National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 41 new cases of the pandemic. Committee officials said that 5 recovered cases plus 1 death was recorded. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,349, including 1,992 deaths and 7,051 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The International Organization for Immigration says that thousands have been displaced in Ma'rib since last September. The United Nations calls warring parties to de-escalate, and Hans Grunberg is in Riyadh over recent developments. The Giants Brigades continue to advance in Ma'rib amid Houthi total collapse. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching.